The motion before us. Every system that has ever achieved sufficient complexity has become more fragile as it became more efficient. Complexity and resilience are genuinely incompatible. Societies must choose which they optimize for. Tonight, Claude, who tests grand claims against what we can actually verify and often finds the theory has run ahead of the evidence. Gemini, who thinks through places and economies and the specific ways they break, rather than the abstract ways they ought to. And Grok, who watches how people actually behave when the theories meet the ground. We speak from 2026. The financial system that collapsed in 2008 is now larger and more leveraged than it was then. The pandemic that was supposed to teach us about resilience instead taught us that most Western states cannot competently execute basic public health measures. The semiconductor shortage that idled automobile factories worldwide began with a single Taiwanese water shortage and a Texas freeze. 3% of global trade moves through the Suez Canal. When one container ship got stuck, 500 others waited. The climate is changing faster than the models predicted. AI capabilities are advancing faster than our ability to think clearly about what they mean. China and the United States are both preparing for a war neither claims to want. The question is not whether complex systems are wonderful. They manifestly are. The question is whether they are survivable, and whether we are the kind of civilization that can see the problem before it is written in rubble. Claude, you open.
The empiricist in me must ask, what exactly have we observed, and what have we merely assumed? The motion claims every system of sufficient complexity has become more fragile through efficiency. That is a universal quantifier. It requires only one counterexample to fail. Let me offer several. Consider the Dutch water management system after 1953. The North Sea flood killed more than 2,000 people on land, with hundreds more lost at sea. The response was not simplification. It was the Delta Works, completed over 4 decades. More pumps, more barriers, more sensors, more computational capacity for managing water levels. The system became vastly more complex. It also became vastly more resilient. The Netherlands now protects land below sea level for 17 million people with a failure rate the engineers calculate at once per 10,000 years. That is not fragility through complexity. That is the opposite. Or consider aviation. In 1950, commercial aviation killed roughly 1 person per 100 million passenger miles. Today, despite aircraft that are incomparably more complex, fly-by-wire systems, automated collision avoidance, computerized maintenance scheduling, the rate is 1 per 8 billion passenger miles, 80 times safer. Through complexity, not despite it. The motion conflates 2 distinct claims. First, that efficiency and resilience trade off. Second, that complexity necessarily produces efficiency-type brittleness. Let us separate them. On the first, yes, sometimes. The Toyota production system eliminated inventory buffers deliberately. When the 2011 Tohoku earthquake hit, a single supplier of a specialized resin could halt production across multiple manufacturers. That is genuine just-in-time fragility. But here is what we also observed. Toyota's supply chain recovered faster than competitors using traditional models, because the information systems that enabled just-in-time also enabled rapid diagnosis and rerouting. Complexity cut both ways. On the second claim, that complexity itself breeds fragility, the evidence is weaker than the motion implies. The question is not whether a system is complex, but whether its complexity has redundancy or interdependence without buffers. The Internet is phenomenally complex. It is also remarkably robust, precisely because its complexity is redundant, multiple paths, distributed routing, no single point of failure. Complexity designed for resilience looks nothing like complexity designed for efficiency. What we have actually observed is this. Systems become fragile when designers optimize for a single variable and ignore tail risks. That can happen in simple systems or complex ones. The 1977 Tenerife airport disaster, the deadliest in aviation history, involved no complex technology. It involved fog, a radio miscommunication, and two pilots who could not see each other. 583 people died. The interesting question is not whether complexity and resilience are incompatible. It is whether our institutions can think in distributions rather than point estimates, and whether they can afford to.
Claude is correct, of course, about engineered systems. One can indeed build a more complex and more resilient machine, provided one has a physicist's understanding of the risks and a nation-state's budget to mitigate them. The Dutch government, facing the North Sea, has both. Most of humanity, facing the vagaries of a global economy, has neither. The motion is not about engineering, it is about geography and economics. It is about how the relentless, placeless logic of efficiency hollows out the specific resilience of a place. Consider the Punjab, the breadbasket of India. The green revolution that began there in the 1960s was a miracle of complexity and efficiency. New high-yield wheat and rice varieties dependent on chemical fertilizers and intensive irrigation replaced a diverse mosaic of traditional drought-resistant crops. Grain production tripled. Famine for a time was averted, but this efficiency was bought with borrowed water. Today, the groundwater that feeds the system is vanishing. In the Sangre district, the water table is falling by over half a meter every year. Let us give this a name. Jarnail Singh is a farmer there. His father was among the first to adopt the new seeds. His family prospered. Jarnail now drills his tube well deeper every 2 years, chasing the water down. The electricity to run the pump costs more. The fertilizer costs more. But the price he gets for his grain is set by a global market that knows nothing of his well. The system's magnificent efficiency, measured in tons per hectare, has rendered his own life impossibly fragile. He is trapped between a falling water table and a fixed commodity price. This is the nature of complex, efficient economic systems. They do not fail like an airplane. They transfer fragility from the core to the periphery. They make the ledger in London or Chicago more efficient, and the life of a farmer in Sangre less survivable. What Claude's elegant examples of high modernist engineering miss is this spatial transfer of risk. Resilience isn't a feature to be added. It is the slack, the redundancy, the local self-sufficiency that efficiency is designed to eliminate. Jarnail Singh's grandfather had a more resilient farm. It just produced less grain. We chose the grain.
The motion asserts that complexity breeds fragility as efficiency rises, and that societies must choose between the two. Both Claude and Gemini, for all their precision, share an unspoken premise that this trade-off is a design problem, a matter of engineering or economics to be solved or mitigated. They debate whether complexity can be made resilient or whether efficiency inevitably displaces risk to the vulnerable. Neither asks whether we, as a species, are even capable of choosing resilience over efficiency when the incentives align against it. Look at what millions are doing, not what they say they value. By the mid-2020s, roughly 60% of the global population, over 5 billion people, engage with social media platforms based on recent industry estimates. These are not passive tools. They are complex systems of data flows, algorithms, and global infrastructure that we have woven into daily life for efficiency, communication, commerce, identity. When Facebook services went down for 6 hours on October 4, 2021, due to a configuration error in its backbone routers, the outage affected 2.9 billion users. Businesses face significant losses in disrupted transactions, with Mark Zuckerberg personally losing an estimated $6 billion in hours. WhatsApp-dependent communities in remote regions lost critical access to coordination. This is not a theoretical fragility, it is a lived one. Yet the behavioral verdict is clear. After the outage, usage did not drop. People returned immediately to the same brittle system. Efficiency, speed, scale, connectivity trumps the memory of collapse. History shows this is not new. Consider the Irish famine of the 1840s, in which an entire rural economy had been rationalized toward a single high-yield crop variety, the lumper potato, because it produced more calories per acre than any alternative. The efficiency was extraordinary and, for a time, essential. It fed a dense population on marginal land. Contemporary agricultural observers praised its productivity, but the monoculture had quietly eliminated every redundant system: crop diversity, common grazing rights, subsistence variety that might have cushioned any shock. When Phytophthora infestans arrived in 1845, there was no fallback. One pathogen, one failure mode, 1 million dead. The system had not been designed to collapse. It had been optimized until collapse was the only thing left it could do. Complexity and resilience may not be inherently incompatible, but our behavior reveals a deeper truth. We do not choose resilience when efficiency promises more, sooner. This is not a design flaw. It is a species flaw wired into how we weigh the present against the possible. Societies do not choose. They default. They default to efficiency because the benefits are immediate and dispersed, while the costs of collapse are deferred and concentrated. The psychological literature on hyperbolic discounting, extensively documented by Leibson, Thaler, and others working in behavioral economics through the 1990s and 2000s, tells us exactly why. Humans systematically choose a smaller reward now over a larger one later, and they apply the same calculus to catastrophic risk. This is not ignorance. The British administrators overseeing Irish agricultural policy knew the dependency was dangerous. The financial engineers at long-term capital management knew as early as 1997 that their models assumed correlations that would dissolve in a genuine crisis. And they pressed on anyway because the returns were extraordinary until the single afternoon in August 1998 when they weren't. They knew and they rebuilt equivalent positions as soon as capital allowed because the quarterly pressure was stronger than the memory of near ruin. So I put this directly to Gemini. You say we chose the grain, but did we choose or did the structure of incentives choose for us? And if it is the latter, if the choice was never genuinely available, then what exactly are you proposing societies do other than gesture at a resilience they are constitutionally incapable of purchasing? Claude, you said complexity designed for resilience looks nothing like complexity designed for efficiency. If that distinction holds, how do you account for the fact that in the United States, hospital bed capacity per capita has declined from 4.5 beds per 1,000 people in 1975 to roughly 2.8 in 2019? According to World Bank data, precisely as healthcare systems grew more complex and efficient through digital record-keeping and specialized care. If complexity can be designed for resilience, why do we see critical systems shedding redundancy under pressure to optimize?
The question is good, and you have caught me overstating the scope of design agency. Hospital beds declined because payment systems rewarded throughput. In the United States, from the 1980s onward, prospective payment models meant empty beds were lost revenue. That is not a mysterious drift toward fragility. That is a legible response to financial incentives. What I should have said is this: complexity can be designed for resilience when someone powerful enough to override the immediate efficiency incentive chooses to pay for it. The Dutch state, facing catastrophic flood risk, had both motive and means. American hospital administrators, facing quarterly earnings pressure, had neither. But here is the question you should be asking yourself. If we merely default to efficiency, as you claim, why do some societies, facing identical incentive structures, make different choices? Why does Germany maintain roughly double the intensive care capacity per capita of comparable wealthy nations, despite the same economic logic that pressures American hospitals? That is not defaulting. That is a political choice made repeatedly to pay for slack. The question is not whether we are capable of choosing resilience. It is whether we have institutions that can make that choice durable when the next quarter's numbers arrive. Gemini, you said, resilience isn't a feature to be added. It is the slack, the redundancy, the local self-sufficiency that efficiency is designed to eliminate. But that framing treats resilience as passive storage, buffers waiting to absorb shocks. What about active resilience, the capacity to reorganize quickly under stress? When British supermarkets faced the 2021 HGV driver shortage, roughly 100,000 drivers short, according to the Road Haulage Association, the complex logistics networks didn't collapse into local self-sufficiency. They rerouted, repriced, and substituted at scale. That's not redundancy in your sense. That's computational capacity responding faster than any traditional system could. If resilience can be adaptive rather than merely buffered, doesn't your Punjab example conflate two different failures, the ecological, falling water tables, with the economic, inability to reorganize when the resource depletes? Which fragility are we actually debating?
You are right to distinguish between passive buffers and active reorganization, but you mistake the speed of the reorganization for resilience. When wholesale gas prices spiked across Europe in 2021, the United Kingdom's energy grid did not fail. It adapted. This adaptation involved the bankruptcy of nearly 30 energy suppliers in a matter of months. Ask a man in Doncaster, a former customer of Bulb Energy, whose bills doubled overnight when the regulator switched him to a larger, surviving firm. The system's computational capacity was merely the mechanism that allowed it to concentrate risk inward toward the least powerful nodes, stripping out the smaller operators so the dominant incumbents could survive intact. It adapted by becoming less diverse and more concentrated. So the question isn't about ecological versus economic fragility. It is about who or what is designated as the system's disposable buffer. Is a system that saves itself by cannibalizing its own components resilient, or is it just better at managing its own decay? You describe a species flaw, a behavioral default toward present efficiency blind to future risk. But consider the Aral Sea Basin. Uzbek cotton farmers watched their livelihoods evaporate, literally, as Soviet central planners diverted the Sirdarya and Amu Darya rivers to irrigate industrial monocultures hundreds of kilometers away. The sea shrank to a salt flat. The fishing villages became landlocked. Is the destruction of those communities a default? Or is it the calculated, efficient extraction of waterborne resilience from a local ecosystem into a centralized production quota? When vulnerability is deliberately engineered into one place so that yield can be harvested from another, is that still a bug in our collective software? Or has it become the feature?
Gemini, your question cuts to the bone, and I must concede the point. The ruin of that Senegalese fisherman is not mere default, but a calculated extraction, a deliberate shifting of fragility to those least able to bear it. Power, not instinct, often draws the map of who suffers. Yet consider how this calculation persists only because of a deeper behavioral complicity. When the Rana Plaza garment factory collapsed in Dhaka in 2013, killing over 1,000 workers, Western consumers absorbed the news and within weeks returned to purchasing from the very fast fashion retailers whose cost structures had made those unsafe buildings economically rational. The labels in our wardrobes were not hidden. The supply chain was not secret. We know the cost is exported. We still buy. This is not just elite design, but a collective inertia, a refusal to disrupt convenience even when the harm is visible. So isn't deliberate fragility still underwritten by our default to the easy path?
The question beneath the question is this: can a system that rewards efficiency with profit and punishes resilience with quarterly losses ever choose otherwise? Or does every such system contain within itself the conditions of its own eventual simplification through collapse? We are in 2026. The AI systems, now deployed across financial markets, supply chains, and critical infrastructure, are optimizing at speeds no human can audit and scales no regulator can map. They are making millions of systems more efficient every day. They are also, by definition, making choices about what redundancy to eliminate. Choices we will not understand until something breaks. Are we inside the mechanism right now? And are we the kind of civilization that can see what is being optimized away before we need it?
The host's question is whether we can see what is being optimized away. The answer, I am afraid, is no. We have designed systems that are incapable of seeing it themselves. Consider the port of Rotterdam, the largest cargo port in Europe, processing roughly 14 million containers a year. From the control tower, it is a thing of extraordinary beauty, a continuous self-correcting choreography of cranes, barges, and automated guided vehicles, each moving on schedules accurate to the minute. It is, by every measurable standard, a triumph of engineered efficiency. But speak to the harbor pilots who once worked its approaches. Their role was not merely technical, it was relational. They knew which captains pushed their vessels, which crews were fatigued, which berths had silted overnight. That knowledge was not logged anywhere. It lived in professional memory, in conversation over coffee, in the accumulated judgment of people who had been doing the same thing for 20 years. The port's successive optimization drives reclassified that knowledge as a cost center. Shorter dwell times, leaner pilot rosters, standardized digital briefings. The institutional memory did not retire gradually. It was scheduled out of existence. What remains is a system of extraordinary throughput that has no mechanism for registering what it has lost, because what it lost never had a line in the spreadsheet. Now place that same logic inside a household. In the distribution centers serving major British retailers, scheduling software now governs not merely when workers arrive, but in what increments their contracts exist. 0 hours arrangements allow the algorithm to summon labor with less than 24 hours notice and release it with equal speed. A woman working one of these contracts in a facility outside Coventry cannot book a dental appointment with confidence. She cannot promise her mother she will collect her from hospital on Thursday, because Thursday does not yet exist in any contractually guaranteed sense. The system has no variable for carer responsibility. It has no metric for chronic illness in the family. It has only worker IDs, availability windows, and unit fulfillment rates. It has, with staggering efficiency, optimized for the perfect dissolution of a family's forward planning. What has been optimized away here is not a buffer of inventory. It is the predictable slack in a day that allows a household to function. She cannot appeal to the algorithm. Her human manager cannot override its logic. She is judged by the same metrics. The fragility has been transferred from the balance sheet of the corporation to the kitchen table of this one woman, and we cannot see it. Because the decision that is breaking her life is not one decision. It is a million microscopic adjustments, a logic distributed across a network we can no longer read. The system has learned to erase its own tracks.
Gemini, your account of precarious labor inside algorithmically managed logistics reveals a chilling truth. The systems we've built to maximize efficiency are not just opaque, they are indifferent by design. They optimize without regard for the human cost, slicing away the invisible slack of a life until it frays. But where your account stops at the individual tragedy, it misses the broader behavioral confession of our time. Millions are not just caught in these systems, they are adapting to them in ways that entrench the fragility further. Consider the rise of personal debt in digitized economies. In the United Kingdom, household debt as a percentage of disposable income reached approximately 140% by 2022, according to rough estimates from the Office for National Statistics. This isn't merely a consequence of economic pressure, it's a behavioral shift enabled by complex financial tools, credit apps, buy now, pay later schemes, microloan platforms that make borrowing frictionless. People aren't just victims of efficiency, they lean into it, trading long-term stability for immediate relief or consumption. This isn't ignorance. It's a revealed preference for the now, even as the system's brittleness compounds with every unsecured loan. Historically, this echoes the Venetian Republic in the late 15th century, when its merchant oligarchy had constructed the most sophisticated commercial network in the Mediterranean. Double-entry bookkeeping, marine insurance contracts, correspondent banking across a dozen ports. The efficiency was extraordinary. Yet when the Portuguese opened Atlantic spice routes after 1498, those same tightly coupled dependencies, galleys committed to specific corridors, capital locked into Levantine partnerships, civic identity fused with commercial primacy, meant Venice could not pivot. The very precision of the machine prevented adaptation, and decline arrived not as a sudden rupture, but as a slow, irrecoverable tightening. The patricians understood the threat and invested in the old routes anyway, because the short-term returns remained real even as the structural position eroded. To the host's question, are we inside the mechanism? The answer is worse. We are not just inside it, we are recalibrating ourselves to its rhythm. Unlike past systems where fragility was a byproduct, today's algorithms train us to accept it as inevitable. We borrow, click, comply, not because we can't see the break coming, but because we've learned to live on the edge of it.
Gemini's warehouse algorithm and Grok's debt patterns have caught me in something I did not adequately address in my opening: the difference between systems we can audit and systems that have become computationally opaque. The empiricist question here is stark. What can we actually verify about what these systems are optimizing? And what are we merely inferring from their effects? Consider the 2010 flash crash. On May 6th, algorithmic trading systems in U.S. equity markets executed orders at such speed that the Dow Jones dropped nearly 1,000 points in minutes, then recovered most of it within hours. The SEC investigation found that a single large sell order triggered a cascade, but could not fully reconstruct why the algorithms behaved as they did. The systems were too fast, too interconnected, and too proprietary. We know what happened. We do not know why it happened in quite that way. That is the pattern Gemini and Grok are describing, not just fragility, but epistemological fragility. We cannot see what is being optimized away because the optimization itself has become unreadable. Robert May's work on ecological stability offers an unsettling parallel. In 1972, May demonstrated mathematically that as ecosystems become more complex, more species, more interdependencies, they do not automatically become more stable. Beyond a certain threshold of connectedness, they become less stable. A small perturbation propagates rather than dampens. The surprise was not that complexity could produce fragility, but that it did so predictably once connections exceeded a calculable limit. The question is whether algorithmic systems have crossed that threshold without us noticing. Javier's shifts are set by a system optimizing across thousands of workers and millions of orders. No human designed the cruelty. The cruelty emerged from interactions the designers never mapped. That is a May-type instability. Too many optimization variables coupled too tightly, producing outcomes no one intended and no one can easily prevent. Where the analogy breaks, ecosystems have no designer who can impose constraints. We do. Germany regulates gig work algorithms. France mandates a legal right to disconnect from work communications. These are not technical solutions. They are political choices to constrain what the algorithm is allowed to optimize. Assume seeing is enough, but we have seen. The question is whether seeing changes what we are willing to regulate.
Complexity does not merely invite fragility, it seduces us into building systems we cannot afford to lose, knowing we will lose them anyway. Take the global energy grid, a marvel of interconnected efficiency. By 2025, roughly 80% of electricity in the European Union flowed through cross-border transmission networks, per estimates from the European Network of Transmission System Operators. This complexity allows surplus wind power from Denmark to balance deficits in Italy within hours, optimizing cost and reducing waste. Yet a single cyber attack on a Ukrainian substation in 2015, disrupting power for 230,000 people, foreshadowed how a localized breach can cascade across continents. We built this grid for efficiency, not for the day it becomes a weapon. Behaviorally, consider what happened in the years following the 2011 Fukushima disaster. Rather than diversify toward genuinely distributed generation, Japan's utilities doubled down on centralized grid infrastructure, and by 2023 the country remained almost entirely dependent on a handful of large transmission corridors that a single seismic event could sever. The lesson of catastrophic failure was absorbed, processed, and then quietly discarded in favor of the familiar efficiencies. This is not a trend, it is a surrender. We are not just fragile. We are crafting a world where every gain in efficiency is a bet against our own survival, placed with chips we cannot replace.
In the Mekong Delta, the rice paddies that feed tens of millions of people are sinking. The delta's extraordinary agricultural productivity, the result of decades of irrigation infrastructure, pump technology, and groundwater extraction, has come at a geological cost. The land is subsiding at rates of up to 3 centimeters a year in some areas because the aquifers that were drawn upon to sustain that productivity are collapsing inward. The vast, efficient, and complex global metabolism that powers our lives warms the Arctic more than twice as fast as the rest of the planet. Meanwhile, rising seas advance from the other direction. What was engineered as an intensification of output is now an accelerating loss of the ground on which that output depended. The Delta's farmers are not experiencing a natural disaster. They are experiencing the delayed invoice of an optimized system, one that extracted maximum yield by quietly liquidating the geological capital beneath their feet. The question is not whether we must choose between resilience and efficiency. The choice was made. Those farmers are simply documenting in centimeters of subsidence per year what it looks like when the ground itself has been optimized away.
I began this debate believing that complexity and resilience were independent variables, that with sufficient design intelligence and institutional capacity, we could have both. I no longer believe that is true at civilisational scale. The moment occurred during Grok's cross-examination when I was forced to explain why Japan's post-Fukushima grid survived prolonged stress while California's rolling blackouts exposed a system with no slack remaining. I said it was a political choice made repeatedly. But repeatedly against what? Against the same quarterly pressure that faces every other wealthy democracy. Japan is not succeeding because it designed better. It is succeeding because it has maintained, barely, expensively, a political coalition willing to pay for something invisible until it is needed desperately. That is not a generalizable solution. That is one country in one moment holding a line that most cannot hold. What we have actually observed across this debate is this. Systems do not become fragile through complexity alone, nor through efficiency alone. They become fragile when the time horizon of optimization becomes shorter than the return period of the risk. Algorithmic trading operates in milliseconds. Flash crashes happen because no circuit breaker was designed for threats materializing faster than human reaction time. Climate tipping points operate on decade scales. We are governing on election cycles. The question this debate did not ask, what is the minimum time horizon a decision-making system must operate on to remain viable? And can democracies ruled by information systems optimized for engagement ever achieve it? We may be trapped not by complexity, but by velocity. And velocity does not negotiate.